Hi everyone, thank you for joining us on today's webinar. My name is Bethany and I'm the Relationship and Engagement Manager here at UMI. And today I'm joined by my colleague Abby, who is our Campaign Manager.
Hi everyone.
Here at UMI, we help businesses by taking the hard work out finding the very best expertise, information and finance. That's why we're here today with one of the very best experts on funding. Before we dive in, if any questions pop up during the webinar, feel free to comment on the video or reach out to us via email, phone, or our social channels, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Now, without further ado, today we're here to explore and discuss funding challenges during these uncertain times and possible solutions. And on that note, I'd like to introduce our guest. So today we have Andrew from Miappi. Hi, Andrew. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, it's very generous of you to call me an expert on funding. I'll take that. I mean, I'm probably more of an expert at setting up businesses and having to then fund them because it's in the nature of the beast, particularly when you're in the technology space. That's what you do. So, and just a brief bit of background, I set up a number of businesses over the last few too many years now, going right back to the dot-com boom back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s when I first started out building ventures. And so I've done a lot of sort of bootstrap businesses. I've done VC backed businesses. I've done debt backed businesses. I've exited ventures where we've sold out, and I've had ventures, frankly, that have failed, where I was just, either I was way ahead of the market and way too clever, or possibly we got it wrong. It was one or the other. So I do have a fair range of knowledge of the different types of funding that businesses might look at. Clearly, my specific area is more in the high-tech technology space, so that might not apply to all of all the people watching this webinar, because they might have specific sectors and specific needs. But certainly within the generic area of funding, I've probably done a fair amount, everything from angels to major VC rounds in the tens of millions of dollars.
That's great, thank you. So our first question for you today is, what are the primary challenges businesses are facing when it comes to funding right now?
I think the biggest one right now is frankly uncertainty. Is that and investors loathe uncertainty. It depends who you are. If you're a day trader or you're a hedge fund, maybe you like a bit of uncertainty because you can play that to try and make a return. But if you're trying to make decisions around backing businesses, whether that's with equity or debt, uncertainty is a big issue, because it's very challenging at the moment to get any certainty on outlook and in terms of projecting how things are going to look as we progress through this. I think it's becoming a bit clearer now than it was maybe 2 or 3 months ago, that as we're beginning to come out, at least out of the other side of the first wave, there's a bit more clarity on how the economy is going. But it's certainly a big challenge for businesses, and some of the normal sources have gone away, but new sources have come in, and it's very difficult to navigate that current maze of funding, I think, if you're in the early stage, and particularly if you put projections out and now you're through no fault of your own, you'll be miles off your projections. I mean, either because you found you're in the right place at the right time and you're doing really well, or frankly, more likely, you're finding it pretty challenging at the moment.
Yeah. And so how can business owners navigate uncertainty then and identify options available to them?
I think they've got to be creative. I mean, they've got to be entrepreneurial. I mean, what most people that start their own businesses are, by the very nature, they've actually bothered. They haven't just thought about doing it. A lot of people say, oh, I could have gone and done that, but they don't. Very few people actually go and do it, where they start up their own business and have the sort of the ambition to go and do it themselves. And that probably means they've got certain characteristics about, I mean, I always joke about the fact I always see no as a negotiating position to yes. And that, my glass is always half full, even when it's only got a drip in it. And I think you've got to look at it from those points of view. You've got to go out there and start looking around at all the various funding opportunities that maybe some things have gone away, but there are plenty of new ones. All these various government schemes that have emerged, all the various different schemes and funding packages that are now out there at a regional level. All the grants that have been put in place, and they're still there. And I think as a business, you don't need to be shy about going for everything you possibly can. I mean, that's what we've been doing, and we've taken some reasonable backing behind us historically, but we still need to make use of all those schemes, because for any small stage business, generally cash is king, and the main thing that kills a small business, it's not actually P&L, it's not actually balance sheet, it's that one line, which is cash. That fundamentally is what will cause success or failure in the early phases of a business. If you run out of cash, then you run out of runway.
That's great, thank you. So you've said there that people obviously should be researching and looking at the options available to them. And are there other financial steps that people can take during uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think you've got to look at how you can rein back all those non-essential costs. I mean, anything that, if you are able to trade through the current circumstances, i.e. you've still got a customer base that's buying and willing to transact with you, you don't want to take too many cuts to your customer-facing activities, but anything that's more sort of behind the scenes, behind the curtain, the more you can reduce those costs. So for example, in our case, we had a big expensive office in London and we're simply not using it at the moment. And so, we've negotiated with effectively our landlord for the building, and we've done a deal where initially we did a deal where we got a number of months at a very, very reduced rent. And now we've agreed a deal where effectively we've just downsized the space. So we've still got space in the building, but we've broadly reduced it to a much smaller area. So we can still utilize the building for meetings and we can use the meeting rooms, but we haven't got the physical desk space we used to have. Now, I'm pretty certain that commercial office space is not going to be a problem to get again if we move into the autumn or Q1 of next year and we need it. So I don't feel that I'm going to find it a problem or we're suddenly going to pay over the odds for that. So that, we've saved thousands a month by doing that and having people continuing to work from home. Other areas, can you cut back on, a lot of those travel costs have gone out, but the more we use things like Zoom, like we are now, I mean, the amount of money we're not spending any longer on traveling and going to events is significant. And that's just happened naturally. But I think even as we move back into emerging out of the initial lockdown, we'll carry on trying to keep those costs tight and trying to do a lot more meetings because we sell globally. So I would have expected to have probably by now would have been on a plane out to the Middle East to see some of our clients in the Gulf region or out to Asia to see our clients out there. And we just simply will cut those costs for now. So you want to look like you can be as serene as you can on the surface, that old duck thing where you're talking about looking smooth on the surface but paddling away underneath and just cutting all those costs you can in the background. So offices are an obvious one. Not recruiting, if you can get away with managing on less staff. I mean, maybe not try not to lose people and you'll use the furlough schemes, but if you can maybe delay recruitment by a few months, if you were looking at bringing new team members in, if you can delay that a bit. I know that's tough on the jobs market and people need jobs, but you need to be there in 6 months and 12 months and 15 months to hire more people to help the jobs market. So, overspending now and finding you have a cash crunch later in the year would not be a sensible plan. And talk to your bank. I mean, if you've already got debt in place or you've already got other liabilities that are going out, it's amazing. Just going and having a phone call with people that you owe money to. Everyone's in the same boat, and therefore that they'll be quite receptive to a discussion. And similarly, if you're owed money by your debtors, if you've got invoices out there, particularly if they're larger businesses, go and talk to them, because a lot of them are being much more supportive of smaller businesses and will look to accelerate payments. So we had a piece of business we recently won from ITV, where we were working on something with them during Britain's Got Talent, and they paid us, we spoke to them and they paid us incredibly quickly for that job. I mean, normally you'd expect with a big company 30, 60 days wouldn't be unusual. They paid us well under 30 days, and that's great for us, and actually they could afford to do it. And they need to have suppliers there in the future as well. So I think speak to your suppliers, speak to your customers, speak to your bank and anyone else you owe money to, and just find a way of preserving that cash.
Yeah. And so on reflection of that then, how can the adaptations around this uncertainty be built into a wider strategy?
I think, do you mean in terms of the current situation, how you can use that to your advantage in effect? Yeah. Well, I think you do need to be aware that and cognizant of a lot of these schemes that are in place are very unusual and are only there because of the circumstances we're finding in. And a good example of that is for example, the furlough scheme. And if you haven't already taken advantage of that, probably by the time you're watching this video, that boat's already sailed. In terms of, you had to have put people onto furlough by, I can't remember what date, but at some point in June, because that was effectively the last point you could furlough them before the scheme starts beginning to slowly unwind between now and October. Now, even if they extend it, I'm not sure if they'll let new people come into the scheme. And so you need to be looking at all the schemes that are out there and spin it from a negative to a positive, to be looking at, okay, what is there out there? There's things like rates relief. I doubt that will be going on indefinitely. There's the rates grant, where they're giving, they're literally sort of just raining £10,000 checks on small businesses. If you phone up, if you're paying, even if you're in a serviced office, by the way, this is an important thing to note. A lot of people don't seem to realise this. If you are in a serviced office, so where you're not paying rates directly to the local authority, you can apply, somebody is paying rates for your office in effect, and you can apply direct to the local authority to look for a grant directly to the business. Again, we did that. We're effectively using serviced office facilities in London, up in Southwark, but we contacted Southwark directly and we got a £10,000 payment from them. Even though we don't directly pay our rates to them, we pay it through the serviced office company. So, I mean, just do not take no as an answer straight away. We had to go back 2 or 3 times on that one and point out to them that there was guidance from the government that said that we were eligible as well. So, look at taking advantage of all those schemes. Things like the bounce back loan. There are schemes in place for small businesses. That's probably more applicable than the coronavirus business interruption loans, which are typically for larger businesses. But the bounce back scheme is brilliant if you're a small business. You've got to remember, it is debt. I mean, if you take the bounce back loan, that's £50,000 you can be lent, depending on your turnover. From memory, I think they're providing up to 25% of, you can borrow up to 25% of your previous year's turnover, up to a maximum of 50,000. But it's very cheap. I mean, you pay nothing for it for the first year. The government covers the cost of it in year 1. After that, you start making repayments over the next 3, 4, 5 years. I think it's probably about 3-year term after the first year to pay it back. But the interest rate's only 2.5%. So it's a very, very low interest, and you do not give a guarantee for it. You are not securing it personally, unlike with the business interruption loan scheme, where there is an element of commitment, where the company had to provide security, and if the company couldn't, the banks would often look to the actual directors and founders. The bounce back loan scheme is not secured against any guarantee you give. It's purely your company's liability, without security from the company either. It's an unsecured loan. So but just bear in mind, it is a loan. So unlike the rates grants, you do have to pay it back. But bear that in mind if you're taking that debt on. But it's very cheap money. Very cheap money. I think there's innovation grants you should look at from the UK Research and Innovation. Go to their website. I think it's ukri.org from memory. But look at the grant schemes they're running. Look if there's any schemes they're running that apply to your sector. They're doing a number of sort of sectorial grants where they're looking for innovation around things that might help with COVID and things like that. So there's going to be a number of, they call them competitions. There'll be a number of grant competitions going through in the next few months. They will be competitive. There'll be more applications than there's funding available, but you're not going to win it if you're not in it. So if you don't get an application in, you're certain to not get it. At least if you put an application in, you stand a chance of getting a grant. So we'll certainly, again, we'll be applying for those as they come out. The other one, which is a little bit trickier for smaller businesses, but the Future Fund is a government scheme where they will match funding from effectively professional investors. Now that can both be, that can be challenging for smaller businesses if they've never gone out and raised any form of effectively equity or venture capital into the business before. And even if you have as a small business, the Future Fund can also be challenging because it's not EIS, the Enterprise Investment Scheme, or VCT, Venture Capital Trust. It's not compatible with either of those. So the method that a lot of individuals might use to back, so angel investors, the way that angels might back smaller businesses is typically using those government tax relief schemes, EIS, SEIS at the very small end up to 150,000, EIS, and then a venture capital trust investment. Unfortunately, the future fund is not compatible with any of those, and that is a bit of a bugbear for the small businesses. But on the other hand, it's a matched funding scheme, so it's pretty good if you can find an investor that will put in. You've got to meet certain criteria, and you should go and look at the Future Fund website. It's on the British Business Bank website to read all the criteria. If you meet the criteria, so you've been trading for a bit and you've already raised a couple of hundred, 200,000 or 300,000 pounds of investment in the past, it could be very useful. And it's been quite heavily, there's been a lot of applications for it. We understand certainly running potentially into the thousands now. So it's, and the government never historically has invested directly in smaller early stage businesses. And I don't expect this to be a long-term plan from the government. It's because of the current situation we're in. And that, I suppose, is, I keep banging away at that message. There are schemes out there that are only available now. If you don't take it now, you're going to regret it in Q4 or Q1 next year when these schemes start unwinding and you didn't apply for them, and you'll find things tough. There may not be the schemes out there for you.
That's great, thank you. So probably moving a little bit away from the uncertainty that we're in at the minute, but in general, when businesses are looking for funding, what do they need to consider when they're choosing a funder?
It's a challenge when you're looking at a fund. It depends on whether it's debt or equity. So if it's debt, remember that the debt provider, so that by debt I mean things like bank loans or a bounce back loan, things like that. If it's debt, the provider of the debt doesn't actually share in your upside. All they're actually going to share in is in your downside. In other words, if you overperform, all they get paid back is their debt plus interest. Whether you overperform, do averagely. The problem is if you do badly, what happens is they don't get their debt back. So you telling them this wonderful hockey stick story about how growth's going to go absolutely amazing because you're going to spend all this money on this huge advertising campaign and it's really, really going to work and it's going to return loads and loads of money. The problem is they're going to think, what happens if that doesn't work? If they do all that spending on that ad campaign and they don't drive those sales in, what's the backstop? Where's the safety margin in this? Have they got another plan? If plan A doesn't work, what's plan B? So a debt provider is much more interested in certainty around your safe, steady, maybe rather boring ability to repay that debt. So I think when you're looking on that side of the market, you need to give a fairly, personally, I end up typically having a couple of different plans, right? So I've got a business plan and a deck I might use with a debt provider, and I've got a business plan and a deck I might use with an equity provider, because an equity provider, moving on to that side, they want to hear excitement and growth and how you're going to win, you're going to be number one, you're going to be the gorilla in your space, you're going to be that 100 million, 500 million, that billion unicorn in the sector, because they're going to have an equity share in it. They want a 10x, a 20x, a 40x turn. So I think the first thing is make sure you understand which audience you're talking to as to what message they're going to want. The second thing to bear in mind is that all these people are effectively spread betting. So to all intents and purposes, for you, it's strategically critical that you get backed. This is your baby, your business. You really want to make it work and you fundamentally believe in it. For an investor, it's sort of tactical. They're deploying their cash troops, in multiple different directions. And they might be, some of them they sort of know might not win, and another direction might actually be where they make their return. And just because you think it's a great idea that they should put another tranche of money into you because you're just on the cusp of success and selling the business for millions, they may have decided that they've reached the limit of what they're willing to do within your business because they've got the rest of their portfolio to consider. So I always say that, when you're looking at an investor, try to look at what their ability to follow on is. Can they put more in if necessary? Do they have a history of doing that? Speak to other people. If they're worth, if they really are any good, they should be quite happy to give you people you can speak to take references. on them. And you shouldn't be shy at approaching other people that they backed to see whether, are they a good investor? Are they too, often investors feel they ought to get involved, when sometimes it's better if they just sat back and let you get on with it. They feel because they put money in, they often feel, and indeed they might legally have a right to get involved and have a seat on the board. Look very carefully at what the implications are of taking that money. Is it sit back money, or is it lean forward money? They'll all tell you they can add value. Everyone says they can add value. A bank tells you they can add value. Typically, they generally just provide cash. So just look at all those dynamics when you're looking at an investor, and just be aware that you're just one out of a large number of probably opportunities either they're looking at or that they have done. And if you raise money, I say it's crack something sparkling open, but maybe a bottle of Prosecco. Save the champagne until you've actually sold the business or exited the business. Yes, it's great if you raise funding, but that's the start of the journey. It's not the end. You've got to deliver the result, and you've then got somebody else in the mix, and that adds a different dynamic once you've got another funder in there. So just bear that in mind. Hence why the more you can bootstrap, the longer you can go without taking too much external funding, and probably the better.
Yeah, that's great. And speaking about investors, and I know you mentioned angel investors earlier, how do you go about finding an angel investor?
The typical place to start is normally to look at your own network. Now, so start with your own network, because those people know you. So if you can start with the sort of the friends and family network and introductions friends and family can make. I mean, I'm not saying you go and lean heavily on your favorite uncle to invest in the business, but he might know somebody who might be into investing in early stage businesses. And it's much more powerful if you get an introduction, particularly in the climate we're in today. Again, it's right now, hopefully things are going to improve as pubs and restaurants and bars and coffee shops are able to open from this weekend. So face-to-face physical meetings will become much easier, but even then some people aren't going to want to meet up like that, and it is really difficult to persuade somebody who you've never met, there wasn't a trusted intermediary introduction, and you're just emailing out of the blue, or you're having a Zoom meeting out of the blue with, to persuade them to part with their cash into your business when they've never seen you, met you, or had any validation from somebody else that they can also trust. So introductions, I think, are super important. Clearly, you can look at all the various, there are a lot of angel networks online, and there's all sorts of Angels Den, there's Seeders, there's CrowdCube, there's a whole range of places that will help introduce you to angel investors. Even then, it's normally those networks work by putting on events or opportunities for the investors to meet with the potential companies. So I think even in that space, it's going to be challenging. If you can go onto those sorts of platforms with a lead investor, that really helps. If you can find somebody who will come in and they look credible and they're backing you with a reasonable amount, and then you go onto one of those platforms to look for top-up money, further funding, then that can work really well, because that again makes people feel a bit more secure about it. But I think if you've never done it before and you're starting day one looking for that first bit of equity investment, that friends, family, your own network, your LinkedIn network, use that as stepping stones. If you can find somebody you want to be introduced to and you can see you've got a common connection, ask that person to make that introduction for you, because it just makes it so much warmer. There was a fund that invested in a friend of mine over in California. It was one of the guys that founded Twitter, set up a big fund, and they actually, lowercase capital, I think, or something like that. But he said that they decided to remove the contact us bit off their website because they analysed all the investments they'd done, and they realised that they didn't make one investment from somebody that came in through that route. Even if some of them got quite a long way, they actually realised that every single investment they actually did was because somebody had introduced them to that potential opportunity. And so they now say, this is Chris Sacco sort of said, if you want to meet with us, you need to get somebody to introduce you to us, because analysing all our investments, we discovered we only ever made ones into people where we had an introduction from somebody in our network. And I think that sort of says it all in many ways. Try and get introductions. They work really well.
That's great, thank you. So in terms of when you're applying for funding, what kind of information is going to be required from a business, and does it differ whether you're, you know, speaking with an angel investor, if it's debt or if it's equity? What are the differences?
Yeah, it does differ, and I started to I was sort of alluding to that earlier when I said that we have a master deck. So what we will do is we'll produce sort of a master pitch deck, in effect, that contains my whole stream of consciousness around a business, you know. So we'll put all our thoughts into one deck, but then depending on the audience that we're sending it to, we'll then take a subset of the slides that are in that deck. So if you are going for debt, they will definitely want to look at the numbers much more closely over the period of time that you're looking at taking the debt for. They'll want to see, do they trust and believe the numbers you put together, that when you're saying it will generate enough free cash flow to repay that debt? You know, how much is that based on actual existing revenue sources the company's already got, or how much of it is blue sky, where you're saying, well, of course we'll have that revenue by that point so we can repay the debt, you know. So how much is already based on fundamentals that are in place? While if you're going for equity, they'll be interested a lot more in how you're going to sort of get ownership of a sector. What differentiates you? What is about your product? I don't like using the word unique, because I don't feel that anything is really unique these days, but what makes you special as a business? And that's also partly, if you can't get that across in the deck, you're probably not going to get it across to a customer, so it'll make it more challenging. They won't, if you can't convince them that you're special, then it will be more difficult for you to convince customers and therefore grow the business. So they're looking for that little bit of sort of magic in the deck, where you show them how you're going to take ownership. And they will look at the numbers, but in their case, they're probably looking more at, what does that mean the valuation of the business might be in the future, even if it shows they might need to put more funding in. You know, I wouldn't be too scared about doing, particularly from equity, to say that we're doing this is round one, we're doing a seed round now, or, you know, or even earlier, we're doing a friends and family, you know, even a pre-seed, we're just raising a really small amount, and then we're doing a seed round, and then we're moving on to sort of, you know, we'll have to do a Series A and maybe a Series B or a Series C funding. You don't have to show that the money you're getting in is all the money you ever need. And I think that's a mistake some businesses make, is they'll always do huge hockey sticks. They'll always show, oh, we'll raise this money now, big hockey stick, we'll never need to raise again. Most VCs will take that with a huge pinch of salt, and they won't believe it, and they'll always assume you're going to need to raise further funding down the road. It's very rare not to, even for positive reasons. If you're expanding quickly, if you raise more, you can expand even faster. So don't be shy about putting in some quite, you know, solid investment and spending to drive growth, and then maybe raise more to drive growth even further. And if you can use sectorial metrics of some sort to show why that means you will be worth 5x, 10x, 20x, 100x the value of their investment down the road, that's what an equity investor will be interested in. While a debt provider is just simply saying, well, can you cover the interest payments and the capital payments every month? Please don't risk too much money in trying to go for exponential growth, because if it goes wrong, you may no longer be able to pay the core debt. So it is a slightly different thing. And in both decks, one of the fundamentals is team. You know, team is really important, because for any investor, whether they're going to provide you debt, they need to trust the people they're putting it behind. If they're providing equity, they need to believe the team has got the entrepreneurial skills to drive that growth. So be very positive about the bits you have got on the team where you can be positive, but also be open about any gaps you've got, because they're going to find them out anyway. You know, so if there is a role you need to hire into, just be upfront about it and sort of say, this is an area where we feel it's one of the reasons we're raising the funding. You know, we need to bring some more skills into this area. You know, team is a pretty critical part. You know, so I think with a deck, you can make it pretty tight. I mean, you can have the basic opportunity that you're addressing, the core information about, you know, how you're going to do that. You know, what is the opportunity? What are you going to do to address that opportunity? How's that going to stack up sort of financially? How's it going to make a return? What's the market size? Why is it big enough? And then here's the team we've already got in place that can deliver on that. And in many ways, everything else is sort of jam on top of that. But if you cover those key areas successfully, Competition actually is another one you need to look at. Don't pretend there isn't competition, because there generally always is, and it shows you'll be much more aware of your space if you talk about the competitive threats. And by the way, inertia can often be a competitor. In other words, you think everybody needs what you've got, and it turns out nobody actually. You know, Clive Sinclair in the C5, his electric vehicle back in the 1980s, he was about 40 years too early. So you know, inertia can be as significant a competitor as an actual real company selling against you. So just be honest about competition. But if you cover those areas, so you don't need to do a 20, 40 slide deck. You know, a short, tight deck with a good presentation, which whether you're doing it on Zoom or face to face, and you don't want to be, you know, umming and ahhing and flicking through your notes too much. You need to learn it. You need to learn that and be ready for those questions that people might throw at you. So when they ask you, you know, it's the old Dragon's Den thing when somebody asks, so how many units do you need to sell at what margin and what's the production cost? And somebody goes, and that is just a nightmare. It is just 101 of how to fail at an investment meeting if you don't know that side of things. And it makes great television, but it's not great if you're doing it face to face with an investor. So practice.
That's great. And would you say then that a corporate finance advisor is essential as well?
Is it essential? It depends what you're looking for. I think if you're looking to raise, if you've got a good opportunity and you've got maybe you've already got some people approaching you looking to provide backing to you, then bring your corporate finance advisor in to help you look at all the options that are available. And you can also, that gives you the opportunity to do good cop, bad cop, where you can carry on being the nice person that of course wants to do a deal with you as an investor, and you can blame the corporate finance advisor in terms of the fact that you've got to talk to other people, and the fact that he's trying to make the terms, they're trying to make the terms sort of a bit more to your benefit and less to the investor's benefit. So that there is benefits in doing that, because you can be one step removed from a negotiation when you want to start playing hardball, if you've got a number of people that are looking to back you, which is a great position to be in. Equally, if you're not even sure where to start to try to find funding, then obviously corporate finance advisors take references on them and don't rush into ones that want to charge you huge upfront fees. I mean, you know, the best ones are the ones that are effectively no win, no fee, that are going to take a percentage of what you raise and are going to charge you either very little or nothing in terms of any form of retainer, because that means you're both incentivized in exactly the same way. You know, you're both pulling in the same direction. You need to raise the funding, and the more that's raised, the bigger their return is. But if you really don't have any real idea to how to go about the funding process, then getting a corporate finance advisor to help hold your hand, to help sanity check your deck, to help look at your numbers and make sure they don't look either too conservative or too outlandish, can be very useful. At the angel end of the market, probably less so. You should be able to work on that friends, family, the network, tapping into things like, you know, platforms like Seedrs or Crowdcube or you know, ones like that. So I would say it becomes more relevant when you're beginning to maybe move on to that Series A. I don't know, I'm going to pick a number, 500,000, 1 million plus of funding. Then the numbers get big enough that there's enough return in it for a corporate finance advisor to look at it, and they can make a difference. If they get you slightly better terms on 10,000 in investment or 20,000, it's not going to make a big difference. On 1 million or 2 million, if they can get you a better deal, it could either be another £100,000 of investment, or it could be another few percent of equity you don't give away, which, if you're right and you deliver a successful business, could be really worth a lot in the future. But watch out for the cowboys. You know, watch out for the ones that just say, "Oh, don't worry, give me £10,000 and I'll introduce you to somebody that will back you with 1 million." They probably won't. You know, they probably won't. So just be aware of that. Does that make sense? Is that sort of it wasn't a definitive yes or no answer. It's a bit of like, well, depending on what you're looking for, they can be right. But take references and talk to more than one. So don't just go the first. Again, a bit like with VCs and invested themselves, look at references, look at who they back. Same with corporate finance. Look at the deals they've done. Have they done relevant deals in a similar space to you? And there's no good just because you want to raise $500,000 and you find a corporate finance advisor that's previously raised $500,000, but it turns out they did it in the food and beverage sector, and you're, I don't know, a high-tech biotech company. They may have no experience of raising into the space you're in. So make sure that they are relevant to your space as well.
That's great, thank you. So our last question today is, how are you guys at Miappi helping brands overcome funding challenges during these uncertain times?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's really sort of turning it on its head. How are we helping rather than how are we being helped? We are certainly working with our clients to try and be cognizant of the challenges which they are facing themselves. So, one of the big sectors for us historically, our business is about finding content from real consumers. So what we actually do in Miappi, in my current business, is that we're looking out there on places like social networks, and we're looking to encourage. So the thing we did with ITV for Britain's Got Talent, it was called the People's Ad Break, and ITV were encouraging people to put together their own version of famous TV ads, like the Weetabix ad when the girl catches a submarine when she's fishing, and the classic line, which is, well, I bet she had her Weetabix. And they were getting people at home to remake those, and we worked with them on that project to gather all that content together. And so a big area for us though was travel and tourism and leisure attractions, because a lot of great consumer generated content is taken at things like, let's say, the London Eye, or Alton Towers, or by a pool at a hotel. Now that area, of course, has been incredibly badly hit by the lockdowns that have happened over the last few months. And we have a number of customers in that space. And what we've been doing with them is either we've been letting them add some more time onto their licenses, so we've extended their licenses, or we've said they haven't had to pay an invoice yet, because effectively the last thing we want them to do is just say, we can't pay, we're not going to pay. We'd much rather let them stretch it out a bit. Or we just said, look, we'll just extend your license to the end of the year. It's on us, it's gratis, let's talk again in Q4 about getting a renewal in for next year. So we've tried to be supportive in sectors where we know that they're having a tough time. Equally, we've had some, with new clients that we were on the cusp of getting signed, but they just can't make the commitment. Again, it was in our interest really to say, look, why don't we do a deal where you come on board now, we start embedding the product and getting it working for you, but you don't have to pay until either you're seeing an uptick in activity, or, in a sense, you tell us when you're ready, and we'll do it as a trust relationship. We're going to have to review it in Q3 and Q4, but if you feel comfortable being able to sort of pay before that, obviously please do, because we need the cash, because we're a small business, but we're willing to sort of to share some of the paying with you. And that's been very well received by our clients, that we're not just, going out to them, notwithstanding the fact that we also need cash. We're not, yes, we're okay, but we're not overflowing it. And we'll definitely see a dip this year we'll certainly see a dip in Q2 into Q3. Actually, we think Q3 into Q4 will bounce back very strongly, and it is coming back strongly as more and more brands need to access direct content from consumers, because they can't go out there and do photo shoots in the way they could before. They can't interact with the consumers in the same way. But notwithstanding that, we're willing to take the hit to support them. And I think, if you treat people well, they'll hopefully treat you well back. So we've done a lot of that. And so that's impacted our own cash flow, but we think it's a calculated risk to support our customers in that way, because down the road, we hope they remember that we did that. So when we go in and ask them for the renewal or whatever, hopefully we'll be considered, one of their. I always like saying, I like to move in the discussion from, rather than us and them, to a discussion about we, so where we're both the same side of the table. What can we do together, rather than it's them and it's us? That's always been one of my mantras. Is I like to get it where, as soon as a client starts talking about what we can do together, I sort of feel like that's brilliant. That's where I want to be. I want to feel like it's a partnership, and we're just working with them, because sales I don't know, a lot of people think that sales is a win-lose. You know, for me to win, someone else has to lose. It's not. It should be a win-win. You know, you need to get it in the point where they feel they've won, whatever it is they wanted to win, and you've also won because you've got business and you've got trade. It's not a win-lose. It's not, you know, that's, I don't like, sometimes on things like The Apprentice, again, great TV, not actually real life. So similar to Dragon's Den, don't believe everything you see on TV.
Well, that's great.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that's been great. Thank you for joining us today. It's been really valuable. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we go?
I don't think so. I mean, I think if that's covered all the points, and as I say, I'm not, you know, I run real businesses. You know, I'm not a corporate financer. I'm not a finance expert in terms of, but I do it for real, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to demean what corporate financiers do, but you know, I'm running real businesses that have to raise money, whether that's being early stage seed money or closing out, you know, a $15 million tranched round of funding from big city funders. You know, I've done it at all levels, and I've done it at all levels over time. You know, I've gone big, I've come back down and done smaller again. Actually, probably doing it in the real world, you've probably got a bit more experience of it than just claiming to be a funding expert. So, you know, I don't want to overclaim it, but I hope that's covered a lot of areas that might be of interest to your audience. And of course, I'm more than happy if they want to, you know, ask me any further questions, you know, via you or whatever. I can do the best I can to give advice in between trying to run this business and everything. But, you know, more than happy to help people where my knowledge is useful.
That's great. Well, thank you again for joining us, and thank you for watching. If you'd like any more information, we have a number of articles and how-to guides for businesses if you go to our website at www.weareumi.co.uk. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.